So my name is Pastor Dee Sandal, and I am involved with the Center of Addiction and Faith as the book club chair there, and I used to own a bookstore, so my love of books is phenomenal. And today we are here with Christina Dent, who wrote the book Curious. And as a pastor, as a volunteer, I think we always need to open things up with knowing that God's walking with us. So let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for continuing to be there, for walking with us, for caring. Thank you for allowing our relationship that we can build each day with you. We just pray that all this work that Christina is doing will come to fruition, that we are here all to help those that are afflicted with addiction. Lift it up in your name. Amen. And so today we have Christina, her book, Curious. What a title. And she just has a curious mind and sits there and looks, why did this happen? What's going on here? She's always curious. And so last week we heard from her and in sharing the story of how she got involved. And this week she's going to go more in depth. And so at the end, there'll probably be some time for questions and answers, or you can put them in the chat and we can address them that way too. With further ado, I'll turn it over to Christina.
Fantastic. So glad to see a lot of you back from last week. I'm going to do like the 1 to 2 minute recap of what we talked about last week, and then we'll move into the next segment. And there were a couple of people who had to drop off right before I got to their name in my list last week. So Stephen Costa, Paula Cleaver. If you want to share your thoughts on that part of the discussion, I'll give you a chance to, and you can jump in at that point also, because I wanted you to have a chance to share with us if you would like to. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and let's see. I can see my screen, but I now can't see all of you guys, which is tricky. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can get this back again. There we go. All right. So last week we talked about what happens when you criminalize the market for a substance, what happens to the substance when it gets banned, and what happens to consumers. So we talked about how criminalizing a drug market, drug markets aren't inherently violent. The alcohol market today, people who are buying and selling alcohol, it's not marked by crime and violence. But when you criminalize a market, it does become a violent underground market. We saw that during alcohol prohibition. We don't have that today because that market is legally regulated again. But we do have that with the markets for other drugs that are still in the underground market. When you criminalize substances, they become contaminated. That's why we have the fentanyl overdose crisis that we have right now, because of the contamination problems with an underground market. And it also becomes very potent. So same thing that you see at, hang on, this is stuck. Same thing that you see at sports stadiums, where you can't drink legally on the inside. People start drinking highly potent, whatever, spirits and things like that, because they're not going to smuggle in a whole case of beer. They're going to smuggle in a flask of liquor. So you get high potency and you get contamination with no quality control at all. So underground markets are can be very deadly as far as what the contaminants are in the product. And fentanyl is just the latest in that march towards high potency. Nitazines are already showing up. Xylazine is already here. There's a never-ending list of drugs that will be developed that will be very high potency and very dangerous for consumers. So we have criminalized markets that lead to a lot of crime. pushing substances underground leads to a lot of contamination and death from high potency with no ability to dose it appropriately. And then when you criminalize consumers, you end up with this challenging cycle of risk of addiction, of incarceration, disconnection, criminal record, employment difficulty, that whole cycle that most people end up experiencing. There are a few people for whom, an arrest was just the thing that they needed and it changed their life. But the cost of that to all of the people for whom it just compounded the harms in their life, that cost is really significant. As well as that you're far more likely to die of an overdose when you come out of incarceration than you are if you had never been arrested in the first place. So all of that cycle of using the criminal justice system to try to handle markets, to try to handle substances, to try to handle consumers, ends up leading to an explosion of harm rather than a reduction of harm. So what are some of the ways that we can undo those harms? We see that as shifting markets back towards legally regulated markets, not a free-for-all, not candy aisle, but regulated markets like we have for lots of other potentially harmful substances. Bringing some quality control back to those substances where they can be dosed appropriately, and treating consumers as regular citizens if they don't have a problem with their substance use. And if they do, maybe they are handled as patients who need medical attention rather than criminals who need to be incarcerated. And so I'm going to pause there. And for the people who were on last week and got the full explanation of that and didn't get to share their thoughts on that, I would love for you to unmute now and hop in and share your thoughts if you would like to do so, before we jump into kind of how we go about inviting people to change their minds on this and what are some of the principles that we are using. So Stephen, Paula, I know that you guys were on last week. Would either of y'all like to hop on and give your thoughts? All right, going to carry on then. You can jump in later if you'd like to. So change takes time. It takes a long time for us to move in the direction towards a health-centered approach and away from this criminal justice approach that has dominated how the U.S. has handled drugs and people who use drugs for many, many years. And so what are some of those short-term solutions? We see harm reduction. Now, there's lots of different ways to define harm reduction. We would see that as the making risky activities less harmful in the same way that we do around lots of other activities right now. Swimming is one. It's not a new concept. We do harm reduction for driving. We do it for cigarettes. We do it for alcohol. We have lots of ways in our world that we reduce harm from potentially risky activities. And there are steps that we can take right now that will help with this particular issue of substance use. That might be expanding access to medication for addiction, expanding access to fentanyl testing strips, syringe service programs. Those are not legal right now in Mississippi, but fentanyl testing strips did become legal last year. And so even moving in that direction, depending on what state you're in. That doesn't mean there's no accountability. There is accountability for related crimes, but really focusing on reducing harm from the substance use itself. So now we'll jump into what we're going to talk about today. How does change actually happen? It's very difficult to get culture change, policy change. Curtis has been working on this for a long time, as he shared last week. It's really challenging to get policy change across the finish line. And that is because policies change only when enough people change their minds and then voice that change to people who are making policies. So policymakers are always testing the waters. They're always trying to figure out, where are my constituents? Because if they vote in a way that is not consistent with their constituents, they risk their seat. And that tends to make them very risk averse. And so if we think about policy leaders as people who are going to lead us in the direction we need to go, I think we have misunderstood how the system works right now. The system works right now as policy leaders kind of figure out what their constituents, particularly the ones who vote in primary elections, things like that, what are they wanting? And then vote in that way. Now, that technically, you know, that is sort of how we think about, yeah, that's what they're supposed to do, represent what the people want. But often the people believe that their leaders will let them know if something isn't working and if we need to change course. But the way the system is set up, it's very difficult for leaders to let their constituents know that because of the risk they take of constituents getting angry, of saying, what? This person thinks we should do this. Well, I'm not going to vote for them next time, and I'm not going to donate to their campaign, and all of these other things. So the general public is simultaneously, they want their leaders to reflect their own opinions, and they want their leaders to lead in a way that's positive. But the risk that leaders take to step outside of what is already acceptable is really high, and very few leaders are willing to do that because they risk losing all of their influence if they end up going too far ahead of where their constituents are. So it's super important that we recognize the role of citizens in driving policy change. Policies will change. We've seen this happen in Mississippi. Fentanyl testing strips failed 2 years ago. It didn't even get out of committee. I mean, it was just dead in the water. This idea that it encourages people to use drugs, that it's, you know, facilitating drug use, was very much present. That was kind of the prevailing idea among the people who had the ability to make change happen on that issue. 1 year later, that was not the prevailing idea. Enough people had spoken up. Enough people had said, hey, no, this is just helping keep people alive. We're losing people. People are dying of overdose because of this. Contamination, we need to at least let them know what they're using before they use it. And it passed unanimously. The governor signed it into law. So when people change their minds and voice that mind change is what creates the cultural momentum and the moving of that window of opportunity to include new ideas that we want adopted. Policies change when enough people change their minds. So a couple of years ago, we had a man who is kind of a quintessential person that you would think would be very opposed to the ideas that we are now presenting. Lifelong Mississippian, been here for generations, Republican, been active in policy advocacy for many years, evangelical Christian, just the probably a good avatar of who typically tends to oppose a shift away from the drug war. And so he asked if he could have one of the copies of Chasing the Scream that we were giving out at the time. It was the book that kind of helped start our organization as we led book discussions on that. And so sent it to him, didn't hear anything from him for about 18 months. And I'll tell you the end of his story as we move on. But somebody that you would think, mine's not going to change. You know, he's in his 50s at this point. Like this is somebody who we hear regularly. People don't change their mind. There's no way that you can reach them. Nobody is going to change their mind. And the reality is that we can't change anyone's mind. We like to believe that we can, but I think all of us recognize deep inside that we can't. You can't force someone to change the way that they think. My grandfather used to say, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. Can't force people to change their minds. So how do minds change? Because no matter if you're talking about this issue, whatever the thing is that you're passionate about, chances are you want other people to become passionate about that too. You want them to agree with you. You want them to see whatever light it is that you've seen. So you're on this call because you want to help share something with other people. When you think about the process people go through to change their mind on something, if they don't agree with you right now, they're kind of in this category of opposed. They might be actively opposed. They might be sort of passively opposed. Maybe they've never really thought about it, but their default position is that they're kind of opposed to the position that you're in. What we want to think and what we like to think is that there they are. They don't agree with us. We tell them some information. The light comes on. It's an immediate, aha, now I know. And they just jump right to this aligned category. They didn't agree with us. We shared the truth, and now they do agree with us. The reality is that minds do not change that way. They always go through this middle ground of the door opening of becoming interested in something. Now, it's really difficult for someone, including all of us, to open our mind to that interested category because it's really stressful. It is, it's a place of uncertainty where being opposed to something is comfortable. You've made your decision, you're against it. And being aligned with something is comfortable. You support it. You're done. It's not taking up mental space for you. This middle ground of becoming interested, curious about something is stressful because you haven't yet decided. You might realize there's more to the story than you thought. And so you can't be fully opposed anymore, but you're really kind of just unsure whether or not you could actually agree with it. This interested part is very challenging. But if you have worked in the field of drugs and addiction, you know that we already know how this works when we relate it to recovery, that it's very difficult for people to go from, a chaotic addiction where it's just, can we keep them alive that day, to the next day, suddenly they are, they've got all new habits and new friends and new purpose and a new job, and they're doing an entirely different life. That's very difficult. What happens more frequently successfully is that people take step at a time, step at a time, step at a time, and they don't make these huge quantum leaps in lifestyle. That's true of people changing their minds as well. People don't make quantum leaps. They always go through that area of being interested. Now, they might move through it really quickly. One time we had a guy that came to one of our presentations, and he said, it took me you were about 15 minutes into the presentation, and I thought, this makes sense, I'm on board. So his window of moving from opposed to aligned, that interested window, was about 15 minutes. For me, it was a year and a half. Depending on the issue, depending on the person and their background, you don't know how long they're going to be in that interested place, but people do not become supportive of things until they have worked through in their mind, how does this impact all of my other values and who I am and what I support, and what is this going to impact? Some people can work through that very quickly, depends on how much they feel is at stake. And some people it takes a lot longer, because changing anything is stressful, not just changing your mind. No matter what you try to change, if you ever tried to change a habit, it takes a lot of work. And changing your mind about something is stressful because it is a time of, part of the challenge, especially on this issue, is what of my other values is this going to impact? What else in my life might I not be thinking about that is going to be impacted by this? So let's say you saw the presentation last week on shifting away from criminality towards legal markets. Maybe your brother's a police officer, and there's a part of you that's curious about it. There's a part of you that's also thinking through, wait, how does this impact what my brother's job is? I wonder what he does. I wonder what he thinks about this. And I wonder, if I support this, do I feel like I'm not supporting him? Or am I actually supporting him more through this? That whole process of figuring out our individual lives, what is it that this new idea is actually going to impact, is something that I think we have to take into more consideration in all of life when we're trying to communicate ideas. People don't come to an idea with a blank slate. They come with a host of other commitments and beliefs. And in order for that idea to find a place in them, they've got to be able to reconcile that with what they already believe. So we cannot skip that middle step. It's also the hardest step. It's much easier to become aligned with something that you're already curious about. than it is to open that door in your mind to, wait a second, maybe there's something here that I didn't know before, and to become interested and move into that category. So how do we help more people become interested? How do we help them take that first crucial step? The majority of advocacy work is aimed at people who are already interested or already aligned. And a big part of our work, and what we hope is, in 20 years is a big part of the advocacy space, is this focus on how do we communicate what we're passionate about in a way that doesn't just preach to the choir, but it actually grows the choir. How do we reach new people, people who aren't yet in our circles, aren't yet on board, aren't yet interested in these things? How do we help more people open that box in their mind of becoming interested? Because that's how you gain more support, and more support means more change happening. So the number one rule of helping people become interested is that you don't first turn them off. And this is really hard, because when you're passionate about something and you want other people to become passionate, there is this belief about being effective that is, the more deeply and firmly I believe in something, the more confrontational I am about it, the more people will know that I am really serious. But in reality, what happens is that the more confrontational you are, the more people pull out their defenses, which is the opposite of becoming interested in something. So it's a different goal. It's not to say there's never a time to for confrontation, for more difficult truth sharing. It just depends on what your goal is. Is your goal to try to open up people's curiosity, to try to help them become interested in something? When I think about the first time that somebody asked me whether I support legal drug markets, this is how that conversation went. It is a textbook case of how not to approach helping someone change their mind. So they led the conversation. This is the opening line of the conversation. Robert asked last week, what are some ways you can kind of spark curiosity that will help people enter the conversation? This is not the way. It started with, do you think we should just legalize drugs? Do you think drugs should be legal? I had no context for that at all. And all that I heard was, do you think drug addiction is good? Which is a stupid question. And so for me, I don't even have to put mental power into this. Absolutely not. Are you out of your mind? That is completely insane. I read a book a couple of years ago that was really, really helpful in helping me understand this process of how to communicate in a winsome way, and why it's so important if you want to actually grow support for whatever it is you're passionate about. And the author is Adam Hammis, and he says in that book, facts delivered poorly are facts to very few people. It does not matter the research and the data that you have. People choose to not believe things that are true all the time. And if they don't want to believe what you're telling them, they simply won't believe it. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. So it matters how we communicate. It matters how we deliver whatever the truth is that we want more people to engage with. It's not enough that it just happens to be true. People are very good at not believing true things. So what are we going to do instead? If we can avoid turning people off, look for connection points. What is it that might appeal to them? What is their value system? And what parts of what we're talking about could appeal to their value system? Maybe we don't share the same value system, but often there are some shared points of connection. How can we find the connection points from where they are to help them connect to some part of this? So for some people, if I'm talking about harm reduction, well, they might not support all different kinds of harm reduction, but most people support Narcan, giving the opioid overdose reversal medication, allowing people to access that. So that's a connection point. That's a place where we don't have to go to the far end of the harm reduction spectrum and start there and say, what do you think about this? We can say, hey, maybe we should make Narcan more available. And for the majority of people, they would be able to find a connection point there and say, that's really what we're talking about, is how do we help people stay alive? How do we help them stay alive long enough that they can make healthier choices and maybe eventually recover if they're struggling with an addiction? So we're going to find connection points instead of turning people off. The second is not to condemn, in the same way that shame and blame and judgment do not help more people recover from an addiction. They do not help people change their minds about the kinds of solutions that we want to see. They don't really help to communicate any idea that you might want to share that is important to you. Condemning people almost categorically shuts their mind off to whatever else it is that you want to say. People are not in a state of learning when they are being condemned. What can we do instead? We can really listen. And this goes back to finding those connection points. If we're not listening and trying to understand the audience that we're speaking with, if it's one person or a whole group of people, we don't know what the connection points are for them. We don't know what their objections are. So we might be making a great case over here on our issue, whatever we're passionate about, but they're not worried about that. They're worried about a whole different set of things over here. The only way that we're going to know what their objections actually are or what their concerns are and be able to address those is if we're willing to listen and speak into that, speak to what they're actually concerned about, rather than just saying, well, you're wrong. It's also helpful just to remember that people are really complex, and we can be right about some things and wrong about other things. Think about somebody like Susan B. Anthony. Most of us know her as an advocate for women's right to vote. And we think of her as like, it's amazing. She's out there, paving the way for people like me to be able to vote. But she was also the founder of the Women's State Temperance Society. She lobbied for alcohol prohibition, which we would look back on and say, the intent of that in her mind was to prevent women from being victims of domestic violence because of, drunken husbands coming back home and beating their wives. But prohibiting alcohol wasn't an effective way of dealing with that problem, and it actually introduced a whole bunch of other problems that we've already talked about. So it's not as though people are one-dimensional. They're either right on everything or wrong on everything. People are really complex. And so we like to find areas of commonality with people. We don't have to agree on everything. That's okay. People can still do a lot of great things, even if we don't agree on everything. So the last one, and this is my favorite principle. If you remember nothing else, I hope you remember these images. To not think about sharing your passion as a battle that you're going into. When you come into a battle, you come into it with weapons. And the person on the other side, or the people on the other side of that, what do when they see weapons? They get out their own weapons, or they get out their shields. They are not coming to meet you with an open heart and an open mind. They are not in any way interested or wanting to become interested in whatever the thing is that you're bringing their way. They are immediately entering a posture of defense or of counterattack. That does not change people's minds. So thinking of battling ideologically with people or battling, it will not win new support. Now, what it can do sometimes is gain some temporary victories, but we have seen this happen over and over again. We've seen it happen here in the state. We've also seen it happen in other places. There was a lawsuit at one point against a particular police jurisdiction here, And they were forced to change some of their practices because of that lawsuit, but only for a period of time. And one of our allies was friends with somebody that worked in that department. And so on the face value, you say, great, that battle forced them to change. But within that department, they were waiting out their time limit, and they were planning to go back to the way they were doing things previously outside of that lawsuit. Their minds had not changed about whether or not that was the best way to go about their work in that area. They had been battled with, and they were just waiting it out until they could go back to business as usual. So sometimes direct confrontation can provide a win, but the win without actually changing minds is generally temporary, and it also risks a counter swing. We've seen that also, where when one side is forced to do something and feels run over, sometimes what they can do is come back with a vengeance and actually cause a backtracking of those gains. And so we don't think of it as going into battle. We think of it as building bridges. How can we build more bridges to help more people come to the places where the ideas are that we think are actually going to change the world and improve people's lives? So build yourself a mental picture of whatever the issue is that you're passionate about. For me, it's drug policy and how we approach drugs and addiction. So I'm standing at one place in my mental picture, and somebody who disagrees with me, this guy right here from a couple of years ago, he is way over on the other end of my mental picture. What I want is for him to come to where I am. I'm standing on this little ideological lily pad, and I want him to come there, but he's very happy over where he is. He doesn't want to change. Changing is stressful, and he doesn't think there is anything that needs to change. So his mind is made up, and he's happy in that space. So for me, as someone who wants people to come towards where I am, I can be angry at them that they're not coming. I can be frustrated that they aren't just naturally interested in where I am, or I can start figuring out how to build bridges to where he is to make it as easy as possible for him to make one step towards me, another step towards me. That's really frustrating, because if you believe that you're right about something, the natural tendency is to think it's other people's job to figure out what's true. It's other people's job to come to where I am. But in reality, people are happy where they are. And we can be frustrated that they aren't more interested in research or data. But that's not going to change anything in my mind. So I think about it as I am on a mission to figure out how to build as many bridges as possible so that people can take a step towards where I am. They may not end up actually where End It for Good is on drug policy. They might take the step and support fentanyl testing strips or Narcan access, or maybe they support defelonization of drug possession, but nothing more, or whatever the case may be. That's wherever they land. I don't own their mind. I can't force them to change or to take any more steps, but I can try to set up as many bridges as possible to reach them where they are and help them take one step at a time, as close as they'll get to where I think the ideal world is. And then respect wherever they end up and continue offering opportunities when it's available and it's possible to work with them on other things, to encourage their interest. You never know when someone's personal experiences are suddenly going to open up a window of interest in their mind. Maybe a family member struggles with addiction, gives them a different perspective. Maybe they come in contact with somebody who can't get a job because they have a criminal record, and they see that in a different way, and they They suddenly become more interested. For this man, we gave him a copy of Chasing the Scream. About 18 months later, he came to one of our events and he saw kind of the whole presentation that you guys saw last week. And he texted the next day and he said, how do we get this done? So he's moved. He has moved from opposed to interested. He was in that interested category for 18 months as he was reading that book and thinking, came to the presentation. Even in the presentation that night, he talked a lot about conflicted feelings over this. It makes sense on the one hand, makes me so uncomfortable on the other hand to make these changes. And yet he's getting to this point of, it makes enough sense. How do we move forward? How do we move towards this? So it's possible for people to change their minds. They do change their minds, and we can be part of setting the stage for more people to be able to change their minds. It's not a perfect solution because we don't own people's minds. But if we want more people long-term to support policy change and not to swing that pendulum to come and fight against it when they are overrun on a battlefield rather than won over on the issue or the issues, I think we see much better outcomes in the long term. And End It for Good is in this for the long term. We want to see culture change, policy change. We want broad change so that in 50 years, people look back and say, I cannot believe that we ever thought incarceration was the right idea to solve addiction. How is that even possible? We think that about other things that we have done in our nation's history. We look back and we go, well, what were our grandparents thinking? What were our great-grandparents thinking? And I think this is going to be one of those issues. But to get there, that process of culture change has to happen. And that happens when hearts and minds are changed. That's how that long, deeper change happens, which is not just policy change. It's also change in how families approach addiction, how churches approach addiction, how businesses approach addiction. And those are the kinds of change that we want to see across the board. So those kinds of changes, whether or not you work at an organization and do this full time, or whether you are just a passionate person who is out there, having conversations with people in your family or community, it always happens with people starting a conversation with whoever it is that's in your circle. Nobody is without influence to the people around them. There are always people who trust you, people for whom you can be that beginning pathway, that bridge being built to some part of the idea that you want to communicate to people. And when we do that through listening and finding connection points and building bridges to people, what we're ultimately doing is meeting people where they are, not where we wish they were, not where we think they should be, but where they actually are. And we see that when we do that related to substance use, that lives can change. And when we do that on the advocacy side, we see that hearts can change and minds can change and policies can change. And that is ultimately what we think will help change the world in a really positive direction on this issue. Then I'm going to turn it back over to you guys again, just like we did last week. I would love to hear people's thoughts, and hang on, I'm going to stop my screen share here so we can all see each other. Thoughts and ideas, what could work, what couldn't work. Are you thinking, oh no, gotta hit that battlefield, building bridges does not work? You can share that too. I'm going to start and do just like I did last week, where we just go down the list. I'm going to start at the bottom of my list since I started at the top last time. And if you will take, let's see, if you will take no more than 1 minute, and I'm going to give you a little roundup thing when you hit the 1 minute mark, and that way everybody will have a chance before we hit 1 o'clock. So we've got 21 minutes. So Sydney, start off, give us your 1 minute thoughts on changing hearts and minds. And you can also pass, you know.
I'm trying. Yeah. So I'm actually going to pass just because I'm juggling the kids right now. So I've been listening, but yeah, so interested to hear what other people say. Sorry, I can't really participate at this moment. So
Awesome. We're glad you're here, Sydney. Stephen Costa.
I'm here. So I'm sorry, my video didn't come up. Oh, I know. So I'm on the fence. I'm sober 35 years. I'm a 12-step recovery guy. I understand what you're saying. I'm kind of getting ready to head to our local prison to work with addicts and alcoholics. But I guess I'm in that transition space. But having heard what you said, especially about the transition of the guy who changed his mind last week, we come here already curious, already willing to learn. And I'm hoping that this is part of my being Jacob and wrestling with God. And I hope that eventually I will say I'm on board, but I'm not quite there yet. But thank you for all the work and you're documenting what you believe in, because that helps me when the head and the heart are not connected. I hear it in my head, but it hasn't quite reached down here to what we call our pu'uvai, our heart, our gut. And so I'm open anyway. So mahalo.
Appreciate that. Thanks for sharing, Stephen. Shauna?
Yeah, I'm taking in a lot. I really don't have much to add today. I'm just taking it all in, a lot of food for thought for sure.
Thanks. Robert?
Thanks for the opportunity. I did go back and listen to the recording from last week, and privileged to be here with you. Met you at the conference last October, and appreciate deeply the work that you and the organization are doing. I tried to access it, but I recall just in the last few days, governor, somebody commuting 75,000 convictions or expunging.
Yep.
And so once I don't believe we have a national legalization of marijuana, but Minnesota this past year legalized it. And it becomes an example of change. And I'm sure that's a long story. But I'd be curious, Christina, what is the most significant step of progress that you've experienced since you started this?
I wrote it down. If we've got time at the end, I'll tell you. Otherwise, you can email me and we'll start that way. Marie, I'm going to move to you. Be sure everybody else has a chance to speak first.
Everything said. When I began running a co-occurring treatment facility, I participated in just about any forum or any place where I could talk about the facility. And that was great because I don't consider myself like a real strong advocate. At least in the form of like getting out there and talking. But it gave me the reason to talk. And some people I encountered were like-minded, like what I believe, and others were like, yeah, no, we don't want that in our neighborhood type attitude. So yeah, I agree with everything that you said. It's more about building those connections with each other, and that trust that comes with that, rather than just saying, well, we're here, deal with it kind of attitude. So yeah, I don't really have much to add, but definitely agree with everything you said today.
All right, Libby.
Thanks. I missed last week. So I'm with you. I'm totally with you. And I think the steps that you use for this could be used in a lot of public settings around most every issue. So I'm really glad to kind of have the tools to speak about that in other ways, in other situations. I guess I'm asking, what do you see the challenge, not for the constituents of people who are in government, but for all the people, lobbies, companies, et cetera, who are trying to impact those legislatures, because the pessimistic part of me says that voice is louder than the constituents' voice. So thanks again.
Thanks, Libby. I'll write that one down too. Quinn?
Okay, there. Thank you. Yeah, after last week, I was just, my initial reaction before I tuned in was, oh no, we got to keep the marijuana stuff out of there. But then after the last session last week, I started thinking about, well, what exactly when, for instance, somebody uses marijuana, what happens to them, like health-wise, or, is it, and I got to thinking, when the consequences they pay, as I was in prison ministry for a number of years, what it does to have that on their record, and what it does, as you pointed out, to the family structures, and in terms of the whatever health benefits. I don't know if it does something to the lungs or whatever. Is it any worse than like nicotine does to our lungs, or what alcohol does to our livers? And this doesn't make much sense, really, that when you put it into the category of it's all right to smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol, but is, for instance, marijuana, I don't know. It's really, yeah, I'm in that this transitional stage. You raised some issues that I was thinking, so thank you.
Thanks, Quinn. Curtis?
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I mentioned this last week, but I'm a lobbyist advocating for drug reform in Minnesota, and just really appreciate your presentation. And I know from firsthand experience of trying to lobby legislators that going into it with a battle mindset is really not advantageous, and on the ground it just doesn't really work as well as trying to build bridges and agree, find out what you could agree on and try to change people's minds, and increase support by just being good colleagues on common sense small reforms instead of being resentful that they don't support the whole enchilada. So thank you.
Which is hard. I'm sure Curtis could speak for a long time on how hard it is to give people the that they don't support all of it, and it's very incremental changes. Kit?
I was not able to be here for last week's session, and unfortunately I have a church commitment next week as well. But I currently am in the state of New York, where marijuana is legal. I lived previously in another state where it is legal. There was a mention about the commuting of sentences. That was in Maryland, where I also lived several years ago. My understanding is that was people who primarily it was marijuana, and that was the only that was the only crime. It wasn't someone who had used a gun or taken something or whatever else. My feeling is if someone commits a crime, then there should be the appropriate jurisdiction under the courts of law. But that I do not believe that marijuana is in reality any more dangerous than, I think it's probably less dangerous than alcohol from my own experience as a person working in that field. So essentially, I agree with you. We need to look at it case by case. People should not be punished for using marijuana. I don't think that people should be punished for using other drugs. It is the people who supply them and the industry and the millions of dollars supported by lobbyists who are behind the whole drug business that we need to be looking at much more than the person who is addicted. The person who is an addict, I believe, is someone who needs to be helped in whatever way possible to become clean and sober again.
Thank you for that. Karen?
Yeah, hi. I started reading your book. It's really great. So, I guess like for talking with people, I could recommend Chasing the Scream, and now I can recommend yours. So, yeah, Chasing the Scream, it really was like the first time of like re-examining and rethinking. And it was a bit of a hurdle. This is not like an easy one. It's not like, oh, let's save the rainforest. Who's like opposed, you know? This is like so many gray areas. And even like we were talking, somebody just mentioned New York. I just went in the city and the place just smells like one big pot, like mess. It's like so like you feel like you're getting high just walking down the street. So there's that. But I know it's something good to support because I have friends that have overdosed on fentanyl and died, and they didn't mean to, you know, they wanted to live. For me, it's almost like abortion, you know, like I'm for it, but personally, it's like, you know, it's like I support things that I know are going to be good for the general public. In that case, what would be like great talking points? I'd love to know like how you built the bridges on something that is like so many gray areas and is hard to, you know, promote or be positive about like 100%.
Yeah, that's a great question. Irene?
Hi, everyone. It's my first time here. It was interesting. I really liked the bridge. As somebody said, it could be used in so many spheres in life, you know. And the way when you believe in something, you're like, that, I mean, you guys come over here. I mean, and I guess because of that, it shows in attitude. And that's not easy to win a debate that way when you're all looking smack. So that was a very interesting take for me. Yeah, it was very interesting. I have not read your book. I'm definitely going to read it. It sounds very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. Fred?
Well, thank you. In reading the book, if anything that stood out to me just jumped out, trauma isn't the only thing that lingers. Connection does too. And really starting right from your book with Joanne, you had the connection. That's what changed your mind. And I realize that's really what you're talking about, the listening. It's us connecting to somebody else and really listening to them. It's harder as it is sometimes because we're going to say, yeah, but, and that's my little, you can see how well I say it. And I just really appreciate you making the connections, building the bridges. I'm doing so much unlearning and just realizing the unlearning part. I mean, I'm still the generation that was shown Reefer Madness way back when, and just the idea after one toke, you're off and running to whatever road it was, perdition. And so I appreciate all this, and you're really giving me more things to think about in terms of just because you're using drugs doesn't mean you're an addict. And that's the other part I'm learning about harm reduction. And so it's really just an ongoing process. And thank you for writing the book and for sending me the free copy. Appreciate it.
Yay. Anybody can get a free copy. You can email us at curious@enditforgood.com. We will send you a free copy, either audiobook or PDF or physical version. We'd love for you to have one. So Erin?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Fred had to say. This is a really phenomenal book and really useful for me in the work that I do, where we have a lot of opportunities to present to law enforcement and get them considering other options when they have discretion to arrest a person or offer them access to treatment or community resources. And so the presentation that we do, a lot of the time we talk about addiction 101 and stigma reduction. And one of the, I've used a lot of the information from Christina's book to talk about, talk a lot about the things that I learned through the book, but just one of the things here is that I'm learning just here today is approaches in the way that I present, because I feel frustrated with them a lot of the time because it's so simple to me. And we don't want to put people in cages because they're not well. And that's just, I just want to say something so simple. Why would you isolate and re-traumatize a person because they are holding on to a drug that they feel like they need? That makes simple sense to me. But you said something today that really struck a chord with me, that they don't make quantum leaps, just like people in recovery don't do that. This is so simple, and I need to hear things like that. That change is a process for everyone. And so I need to remember that and be patient with all people, not just with people who use drugs. And so I need to think about that and reprioritize the way that I speak to all people, even police officers, because they're human beings too. And so I'm going to think about that some more before my next training in 1 month. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. The other Robert.
Hi, yeah. One thing about the book, it's nice to be able to put it on your shelf and refer to it and stuff, but I would encourage people to give a copy to their library and tell other people that it's there and that they can read it. The other thing I wanted to mention is your End It for Good's report on healthy but hired. And I think that would be helpful for people to read about how it's important for people to realize that it's not just about the person using drugs, but it's about the rest of us also. And if you have somebody who's trying to reach recovery or is in recovery, and they have all these other collateral consequences that go with a felony record, that affects all of us. They're not making as much money. They're more likely to be on public assistance and just other things that, and then there's an intergenerational issue that goes on too, which is easy to forget. But anyway, that's it.
Thanks, Robert. Katie, we got 1 more minute left. What about you and Dee? I know you guys are there hosting, but any thoughts you want to share?
I'm just thrilled to be a part of this discussion that hits home on so many levels that I think that we would need a whole other Zoom to tackle. even just thinking about family members and their own struggles, it's so prevalent, and it's so important that folks have the opportunity like this one to commiserate. I think that's the biggest part of it for me, is the sense of community that we all have in being able to converse together with this shared experience and try and channel it to good and to end it for good. So thank you. And just while I'm here, just a shout out to everyone for attending and being a part of the center as well, and for the opportunity to speak.
Fantastic. And I'll let Dee take us out. So I've written down the questions that you guys asked. We'll start next week's answering those questions. So even if you can't log on next week, I know it'll be recorded and you can watch that first part of next week. And I'll answer these questions on what are the ways we build bridges? How do you overcome lobbies? What are the biggest steps towards progress that have happened over the last 5 years? We'll start with that next time. But Dee, I'll let you give your thoughts and close us out.
Well, I am Dee, but I am also a grateful alcoholic. I've been sober since January 1st, 1974. And it's 50 years that I've been trying to fit in society instead of standing out and saying that I am not different, that we are all a part of society. And we've just got to figure out how we can verbalize and help people understand. I'm trying to do that at my church right now. And I'm looking, okay, what are some small steps I can do? And one of the biggest things is just saying who I am out loud. And I've been trying to fit in, and now I'm just saying, no, you guys need to know that people all around you are people of addiction, and we all have unnatural attachments. You know, I mentioned this class, and Libby was in it too, the spiritual companionship training. Same things that she said there, you're saying, you know, that we just need to just take it one at a time, no arguing, no, just listen to the other person and figure out how we can lift things up together. So with that, I'll end up, see if I can come up one more week. So everybody be there. And we're excited about that. In July, we have another speaker that's coming for 2 weeks. And I don't have the name in front of me. Of course, maybe Katie can pop up with it. The conferences this fall, it will be on Zoom. Roseanne Fort will be in July. There we go. Thank you, Katie. And so the conference will be online and it'll be all Zoom. And we're really excited. We have great speakers like Christina and Roseanne, and all kinds of people. Stephen King, who was mentioned in your book, he's done great things, Timothy King. And, you know, all these people that are trying to help us move forward. Other countries have done it and we haven't quite figured out how to do it. So let's start doing that and working together. So without further ado, you know, make sure you signed up on our you can go to a Center of Addiction and Faith and sign up if you want to become a member. Please feel you're welcome to add to our contribution, and we'd appreciate that. So thank you, Christina, and we'll see you next week with the answers to all our questions, right? All right.
Or more questions. We'll see. Thanks
All
everyone
right.
for being here. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
See you
bye-bye.
next week.